the first night I worked alone. The snow fell so heavy it blurred the street lamps into hazy orange halos. I kept glancing at the front glass, watching the dark street for headlights that never came. Then I saw him. Tall, thin, wrapped in a parka so dark it looked like a tear in the air. He stood just outside the halo of light, his head tilted like he was trying to read the menu from the sidewalk. I turned to wash my hands, and when I looked back, he was closer, face pressed to the glass. No breath fogged the pain. His eyes were open too wide, the kind of wide that makes you think the lids might tear if they stretched any further. When I blinked, he was gone. But the glass still had 2 perfect handprints on it, and they were warm. My name is Jake Tikovic, and 3 months ago I thought Kotzebue, Alaska, would be my fresh start. After losing my construction job in Anchorage and burning through my savings on a gambling problem that cost me my marriage, this remote Arctic Circle town seemed like the perfect place to disappear. Population 3,200, sitting on a spit of land jutting into Kotzebue Sound, where the Noatak and Kobuk rivers dump their silt into waters that freeze solid for 8 months a year. The subway sits on 2nd Avenue, wedged between Nulagvik Hotel and the AC Value Center. During daylight hours, it's busy enough. Locals grabbing lunch, tourists heading to the national parks, workers from the Red Dog Mine. But after 10 p.m., when the last scheduled flight leaves Bud Helmerich's airport and the few streetlights fight a losing battle against the Arctic darkness, the place becomes something else entirely. I took the overnight shift because it paid him extra $3 an hour, and because my supervisor, Nayeli Kanguk, warned me it came with special considerations. She'd worked nights here for 2 years before moving to days, and when she handed me the keys that first evening, her hands shook slightly. "There's a protocol list taped inside the office," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Read it. Follow it exactly. Don't try to be clever." "Protocol for what?" "For staying alive until morning." I figured she was messing with the new guy from the lower 48. Every small town has its hazing traditions, its ghost stories designed to spook outsiders. But when she gripped my wrist, her fingers cold even through my jacket, and repeated, "exactly," something in her voice made my stomach clench. The building itself feels wrong after dark. Built in the 70s, it has that institutional beige color that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The walk-in cooler hums with a frequency that makes my teeth ache. The fluorescent tubes above the prep counter flicker in a rhythm that never quite settles into a pattern. And then there are the sounds from the basement storage area, scraping like fingernails on concrete, always stopping the moment I pause to listen. That first night, after the handprint incident, I finally read Nayeli's protocol list. 7 rules, written in her careful handwriting, each one stranger than the last. By dawn, I understood why her hands had trembled. The office door stuck when I tried to open it, wood swollen from the constant temperature changes. Inside, a metal desk took up most of the cramped space, its surface cluttered with delivery invoices and a coffee mug that had seen better decades. The protocol list was exactly where Nayeli said it would be, taped to the wall next to the time clock, the paper yellowed at the edges. Her handwriting was small and precise, each letter carefully formed like she'd been afraid of making mistakes. Night shift protocols, Kotzebue subway. Never acknowledge customers who enter without making the door chime. Serve them normally, but do not speak unless they speak first. When they leave, clean everything they touched with the bleach solution under the register. If you hear scratching from the basement storage, turn the radio to KOTZ 7:20 a.m. and raise the volume until it stops. Do not investigate. The sound will stop by itself. Between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., if someone knocks on the back door, check the peephole first. If you see anyone wearing traditional nuklux or a fur-trimmed parka, do not open the door. Wait until they leave on their own. Keep the coffee pot brewing all night. If it ever goes empty, refill it immediately. The smell keeps them from getting too close to the prep area. If a customer orders only meat, no bread, vegetables, or condiments, and pays with exact change in quarters, take their money, but throw the sandwich away after they leave. Do not eat anything for the rest of your shift. The basement storage light operates on a timer, 30 minutes maximum. If you need supplies, get in and out quickly. If the light goes out while you're down there, count to 60 before moving. They hunt by motion, not sight. Lock the front door at exactly 3:33 a.m. and keep it locked until 4:44 a.m. During this time, anyone outside is not a customer. Do not make eye contact if they tap on the glass. I read through the list 3 times, waiting for the punchline that never came. Each rule felt like it had been written by someone who'd learned it the hard way. The paper was worn smooth in places, like other hands had gripped it while reading. My phone showed 11:47 p.m. The snow had thickened outside, turning the street into a tunnel of white static. I folded the protocol sheet and slipped it into my back pocket, telling myself it was just small-town superstition. Maybe something to do with the local and Inupiaq legends Naeli had mentioned during training. Stories about spirits that wandered between worlds during the long Arctic nights. The radio crackled from its perch above the soda machine. I'd tuned it to some classic rock station from Fairbanks, but static kept bleeding through. The basement door stood slightly ajar, a rectangle of black that seemed to swallow the light from the prep area. I walked over and pushed it shut, hearing the latch click. As if responding to the sound, something scraped against concrete below. My fingers found the radio dial, turning it until KOTZ 720 came through clear. A late-night talk show, the host's voice warm and familiar as he discussed the weather forecast. Gradually, the scraping faded. The front door chimed. A woman entered, shaking snow from her blue parka. Mid-40s probably, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked normal enough, tired, like she'd just gotten off a late shift at the hospital or the telecommunications center. "Evening," she said, approaching the counter. I started to respond, then stopped. I hadn't heard the chime when she'd opened the door, but she was standing right there, snow melting off her boots onto the tile floor, breath visible in small puffs. The door had definitely chimed just now. I'd heard it clearly. "What can I get for you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She ordered a turkey and Swiss on honey oat, extra pickles, normal conversation flowing between us as I assembled her sandwich. When I handed it over, she paid with a $20 bill and waited patiently for her change. Everything felt routine, ordinary. But when she left, the door never chimed again. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the glass where her shoulder had brushed against it. Then I remembered the first rule and fetched the bleach solution from under the register. The bottle was nearly full, as if it got used regularly. The prep counter where I'd made her sandwich cleaned easily enough. But when I wiped down the door handle, the cloth came away stained with something that wasn't snow. Something dark and thick that smelled like copper pennies left too long in a pocket. Outside, the woman was nowhere to be seen. The snow fell undisturbed across the empty street, and there were no footprints leading away from the restaurant. My watch read 12:23 a.m., 6 hours and 37 minutes until sunrise. I pulled out the protocol sheet and read it again. The coffee pot gurgled as it finished brewing its second batch of the night. I'd checked it obsessively since reading the protocols, topping it off whenever the level dropped below half. The smell filled the restaurant, rich and bitter, cutting through the scent of cleaning chemicals and whatever that stain on the door had been. Around 1:15 a.m., the scratching started again. This time it was louder, more persistent, like fingernails dragging across rough concrete in long, deliberate strokes. I turned the radio back to KOTZ 720, where a midnight DJ was playing traditional Inupiaq drum songs mixed with classic country. The volume dial turned easily under my fingers, and gradually the scraping subsided into silence. "That's better," I muttered, then immediately regretted speaking aloud. The restaurant felt like the kind of place where words carried further than they should. I busied myself restocking the sandwich station, laying out fresh lettuce and tomatoes from the walk-in cooler. The vegetables looked normal enough under the prep lights, though the lettuce had a wilted quality that spoke of too much time in transit from Anchorage. Everything in Kotzebue came from somewhere else, shipped or flown in at prices that made groceries a luxury. The door chimed at 1:43 a.m. A man entered, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a Carhartt jacket that looked like it had seen a decade of hard use. Snow clung to his boots. Actual snow this time, not whatever had come off the woman's feet earlier. He nodded at me and approached the counter, studying the menu board like he'd never seen it before. "What's good here?" he asked. His voice sounded normal, tired but friendly. I relaxed slightly. Turkey and provolone's popular. The Italian BMT, if you want something with more flavor. Nah, he shook his head. Just give me the meat. All of it. All of what? Turkey, ham, roast beef, salami. No bread, no vegetables. Just the meat. I felt my stomach drop. You want it in a bowl or... doesn't matter. Just the meat. My hands moved automatically, portioning out slices of each meat onto a piece of deli paper. Turkey, ham, roast beef, salami, the works. The man watched with an intensity that made my skin crawl, like he was memorizing every movement. When I folded the paper around the meat and handed it over, he reached into his pocket. Quarters, a neat stack of them, counted out to the exact price. "Thank you," he said, taking the package. His fingers brushed mine briefly, and they were cold enough to make me flinch. "Appreciate you staying open late." He left without another word, the door chiming normally behind him. Through the glass, I watched him disappear into the swirling snow, and this time I could see his footprints, deep impressions that filled quickly with fresh powder. I stared at the quarters on the counter. They were old, tarnished silver that hadn't seen circulation in years. Some bore dates from the 1970s. When I picked them up to put in the register, they felt heavier than quarters should. The protocol echoed in my mind. Throw the sandwich away after they leave. But it hadn't been a sandwich, just loose meat wrapped in paper. Did that count? I looked toward the door, but the man was long gone. Better safe than sorry. I dumped the entire portion into the trash, then added the deli paper for good measure. "Do not eat anything for the rest of your shift." My stomach rumbled in protest, but I'd brought a thermos of soup from home anyway. Reheated lentil, something that had been dinner 3 days running. I could last until morning. By 2:20 a.m., I needed more sandwich rolls from the basement storage. The timer switch was mounted on the wall next to the basement door. A simple twist dial marked in red increments. I turned it to 30 minutes and flicked the light switch. The basement stairs creaked under my weight, 15 wooden steps down to a concrete floor. Shelves lined both walls, stocked with paper goods, cleaning supplies, and boxes of frozen bread products. The air was colder down here and carried a musty smell like old newspapers. I worked quickly, grabbing 2 sleeves of Italian rolls and a box of sandwich wraps. The light cast harsh shadows between the shelves, creating pockets of darkness that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. My boots echoed off the concrete with each step. Halfway back to the stairs, the light went out. Complete darkness swallowed me. Not even the faint glow from upstairs penetrated this far into the basement. I froze, remembering the protocol. If the light goes out while you're down there, count to 60 before moving. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Something moved in the darkness behind me, not the scraping from earlier. This was different. Soft footsteps like bare feet on concrete. 15 Mississippi, 16 Mississippi. The footsteps circled around me, staying just out of reach. I could feel displacement in the air, as if something large was moving carefully through the narrow aisles between shelves. 30 Mississippi, 31 Mississippi. My grip tightened on the bread products, the plastic wrapping crinkling under my fingers. The sound seemed loud enough to wake the dead, but the footsteps didn't pause or change direction. 45 Mississippi, 46 Mississippi. Breathing. Slow and steady, like someone trying to stay quiet while sleeping. But it came from multiple directions. Behind me, to my left, somewhere near the stairs. 58 Mississippi, 59 Mississippi, 60. I moved toward where I thought the stairs should be, taking careful steps in the absolute darkness. My hand found the wall, then the banister. The wooden steps felt solid under my feet as I climbed, never looking back even when the breathing grew louder. The timer had reset itself somehow. When I reached the top, the dial read 28 minutes. I twisted it off and the basement light flickered back on, casting normal yellow illumination down the stairs. The basement looked exactly as I'd left it. Shelves neat, boxes stacked properly, no sign that anything had been disturbed. But when I closed the door, I could swear I heard something large settle onto the bottom step. I restocked the bread station with hands that shook only slightly, then checked the coffee pot. Still half full, still brewing. The radio played a weather report. More snow expected through the weekend, temperatures dropping to 20 below. My watch read 2:47 a.m. Less than an hour until the lockdown period began. I pulled out the protocol sheet and read Rule 7 again, trying to figure out exactly what I was supposed to do when 3:33 arrived. Outside, the snow continued falling, and shapes moved just beyond the reach of the streetlight. At 3:30 a.m., I stood behind the counter with my hand on the front door lock, watching the second hand sweep toward 12 on my watch. The street outside was empty, except for the falling snow and the weak pools of light from the street lamps. My breath came out in visible puffs. The heating system never quite kept up with the Arctic wind that found every crack in the building. 3 minutes. 2 minutes. 1 minute. At exactly 3:33, I turned the deadbolt and flipped the sign to closed. The metal was cold against my palm, and the click echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot. According to the protocol, I now had 71 minutes until I could unlock it again. 71 minutes when anyone outside wasn't a customer. I'd barely stepped away from the door when the knocking started at the back. 3 sharp raps, then silence, then 3 more. The back door led to the alley where the dumpster sat, flanked by stacks of empty cardboard boxes that never seemed to get picked up. During my first week, Nayeli had shown me how to prop it open during deliveries, but had warned me never to use it after dark, unless there was an emergency. If someone knocks on the back door, check the peephole first. I walked through the prep area, past the walk-in cooler and the 3-basin sink, to where the rear door stood. The knocking came again, patient, persistent. Not frantic like someone in trouble, but methodical like someone who knew they'd eventually be answered. The peephole was small and scratched, the kind of fisheye lens that distorted everything around the edges. I pressed my eye to it and looked out into the alley. A figure stood about 6 feet from the door, partially obscured by the swirling snow. Tall, wearing what looked like a traditional Alaskan parka. Dark fur trim around the hood, the kind made from seal or caribou. The boots were harder to make out, but they had the distinctive shape of mukluks, the traditional footwear that elders still wore during the harshest weather. If you see anyone wearing traditional mukluks or a fur-trimmed parka, do not open the door. The figure raised their hand and knocked again. 3 measured raps that seemed to vibrate through the steel door and into my bones. I stepped back, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The knocking continued for 20 minutes. Always the same pattern. 3 raps, then silence, then 3 more. I tried to ignore it, focusing on cleaning tasks that didn't need doing. Wiping down already clean surfaces, reorganizing the condiment station, checking the coffee pot for the dozenth time. Then it stopped. I returned to the peephole, pressing my eye against the lens. The alley was empty, except for the dumpster and the scattered cardboard. Snow had already begun filling in the footprints where the figure had stood, but I could still make out the distinctive oval impressions of mukluks in the white powder. My watch read 4:08 a.m. 36 minutes until I could unlock the front door. That's when I saw movement in the dining area. Someone was sitting in the corner booth facing away from me. Dark hair, winter jacket, sitting perfectly still like they'd been there for hours. The booth where nobody had been 5 minutes ago when I'd wiped down the tables. My stomach dropped. The front door was still locked. I'd checked it twice. The back door hadn't opened. The windows were sealed shut for the winter. There was no way anyone could have gotten inside. But there they were. I approached slowly, my footsteps loud on the tile floor. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. As I got closer, I could see it was a young woman, maybe early 20s, with long black hair that hung straight down her back. Her jacket was old-fashioned, the kind with a fur-lined hood that my grandmother might have worn. "Excuse me," I said. "We're closed." She didn't respond, didn't even twitch. I walked around the booth to face her, and what I saw made my throat close up. Her eyes were open, staring straight ahead at the wall-mounted television that hadn't been turned on all night. But her eyes weren't right. They reflected the light like an animal's, with a blue-white shine that made my skin crawl. "This?" I tried again. She blinked once, a slow, deliberate motion that took too long to complete. When her eyes opened again, they were normal brown, warm and confused. "Oh," she said, looking around the restaurant like she'd just woken up. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were closed." Her voice was normal, apologetic, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who'd worked late and stopped in for a quick bite. But I hadn't unlocked the door. She couldn't have gotten in. "How did you—" I started. "I should go." She stood up, smoothing down her jacket. "Thanks, anyway." She walked toward the front door, and I followed, my mind racing. The door was still locked, deadbolt turned, sign still flipped to closed. She reached for the handle and turned it easily. The lock clicked open. She stepped out into the snow and was gone, vanishing into the white static beyond the streetlight. The door swung shut behind her, and when I tested the handle, it was locked again, as if it had never been opened. I stood there staring at the glass, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The booth where she'd been sitting was empty, but the vinyl seat was still warm when I touched it. And there was something else. a smell like wet fur and old leather that hadn't been there before. My watch read 4:31 a.m., 13 minutes until I could officially unlock the door again. The coffee pot chose that moment to run dry. I'd been so distracted by the woman that I'd forgotten to check it. The heating element sizzled against the empty glass, filling the air with the acrid smell of burning coffee residue. I rushed to refill it, dumping in fresh grounds and water, my hands shaking as I worked. The protocol had been clear. Keep the coffee pot brewing all night. The smell keeps them from getting too close to the prep area. But it was too late. As the fresh pot began to brew, I heard movement from behind the counter. Soft, shuffling sounds like bare feet on tile. When I turned around, there were wet footprints leading from the front door to the dining area, even though no one had come in. The prints were small, child-sized, and they led to the booth where the woman had been sitting. But these weren't boot prints or shoe prints. They looked like they'd been made by bare feet, toes splayed wide for balance on ice. I followed the trail with my eyes, counting the steps. 7 prints from the door to the booth, but only 6 prints leading back toward the counter. The 7th set led behind the prep area, toward the basement door. My watch read 4:42 a.m. 2 minutes until I could unlock the front door and let whatever was down there know that normal business hours have resumed. 2 minutes until the protective barrier of the lockdown period ended. The scratching from the basement had started again, but this time, it was different. Not fingernails on concrete, but something sharper. Something that bit into the foundation stones with the persistence of running water wearing away rock. I checked the coffee pot one more time, watching the dark liquid drip steadily into the glass carafe. The smell was strong now, bitter and reassuring. Whatever these things were, they didn't like it. But they were inside now, and I had 2 minutes left of safety. I pulled out the protocol sheet and read through it again, looking for anything I might have missed. 7 rules, each one a hard-learned lesson, written in someone else's blood. But there had to be an 8th rule. Something for when the other 7 weren't enough. At exactly 4:44 a.m., I heard the front door unlock itself. The deadbolt turned with a soft click, and the closed sign fluttered against the glass as if pushed by wind that couldn't exist inside the restaurant. I stood frozen behind the counter, watching the door drift open just wide enough for someone thin to slip through sideways. Nobody entered, but the temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. My breath began fogging immediately, each exhale a white puff that dissipated too slowly in the suddenly thick air. The coffee pot steamed more violently, the fresh brew working overtime to fill the space with its protective scent. But it felt like trying to stop a flood with a paper towel. The wet footprints on the floor had multiplied. What started as 7 small prints now covered the dining area, dozens of them overlapping and crisscrossing like a dance pattern only they understood. Some were child-sized, others longer and narrower, as if the feet that made them belonged to people who'd been stretched on a rack. I backed toward the prep area, keeping my eyes on the basement door. The scratching had stopped, replaced by something worse. Silence so complete it made my ears ring. The kind of quiet that comes right before an avalanche, when even the wind holds its breath. The radio crackled, static bleeding through the COT signal, until the DJ's voice warped into something that might have been words in a language I didn't recognize. The numbers on the display flickered between stations, cycling through frequencies that shouldn't have existed on this dial. Jake. My name, spoken by a voice I recognized. My ex-wife, Sarah, calling from somewhere in the dining area. I spun around, searching the empty booths and tables, but saw nothing except those wet footprints reflecting the prep lights. Jake, come here. I need to talk to you." Her voice was perfect. The same slight rasp she got when she was tired, the way she dragged out the vowels when she was being serious. But Sarah was in Anchorage, probably asleep in our old bed with her new boyfriend. She had no business being in a Subway restaurant in Kotzebue at 5 in the morning. "I know you can hear me." The voice moved, coming now from near the front door. "Don't be stubborn. We need to talk about what happened." I pressed my back against the walk-in cooler door, the metal cold even through my jacket. The protocol sheet crinkled in my pocket as I shifted, and I pulled it out with shaking fingers. 7 rules, but nothing about voices that knew your name. Nothing about ex-wives who couldn't possibly be here. The basement door creaked open. A small hand gripped the edge of the frame, pale fingers with nails bitten down to the quick, like a nervous child's. The hand was followed by an arm, then a shoulder, then a face that made my stomach lurch. It was a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with black hair that hung in wet strings across his forehead. His skin was gray-white, the color of old snow mixed with dirt, and his eyes were the milky blue of cataracts. But he moved with purpose, stepping carefully onto the prep room floor like he was testing the temperature of bathwater. "You're not supposed to be here," I said, my voice coming out as a croak. The boy tilted his head, water dripping from his hair onto the tile. When he opened his mouth to speak, black liquid poured out instead of words. It splattered on the floor between us, steaming slightly in the cold air. Sarah laughed from somewhere behind me. "Oh, Jake, you always were dramatic. It's just a kid. What's the worst that could happen?" More children emerged from the basement. 3, then 5, then too many to count. All of them dripping with that same black liquid, all of them moving with the careful steps of people walking on thin ice. They spread out through the prep area, touching surfaces with their pale fingers, leaving dark smears on everything they contacted. The oldest looked maybe 12, wearing a traditional Inupiaq parka that had seen better decades. The youngest couldn't have been more than 5, dressed in what might have been a school uniform from the 1980s. All of them shared that same gray-white skin and clouded eyes. "They've been waiting," Sarah's voice said, now coming from directly behind me. "All night, they've been waiting for the coffee to run out, for the protection to fade. They're so patient, these little ones." I spun around, but there was nobody there. Just the prep station and the walk-in cooler and the coffee pot brewing its 3rd batch of the night. The smell was stronger now, almost overpowering, but it wasn't stopping them anymore. One of the children, the boy in the school uniform, reached for the sandwich station. His fingers passed through the sneeze guard like it was made of water, and when he touched the lettuce, it turned black and crumbled to ash. "Don't," I said, stepping forward. "Don't touch the food." The boy looked at me with those clouded eyes and smiled. His teeth were small and sharp, filed the points like a fish's. When he spoke, his voice was the sound of ice breaking on the Kotzebue sound. "Hungry," he said. "So hungry." The other children took up the word, passing it between them like a prayer. "Hungry, hungry, hungry." Their voices layered and echoed until the restaurant filled with the sound of desperate need. I backed toward the front door, hoping to escape into the snow and wind. But when I reached for the handle, my hand passed right through it. The door was there, solid and real to look at, but I couldn't touch it, couldn't open it, couldn't leave. "The 8th rule," Sarah's voice whispered in my ear, so close I could feel breath that shouldn't exist. "Nobody told you about the 8th rule, did they? What 8th rule? If they get inside, you become one of them. If they touch you, you stay forever. Night shift, every night, until someone else makes the same mistakes you did." The children were spreading through the restaurant now, their wet footprints joining the maze already covering the floor. They moved toward me slowly, not rushing, taking their time. They had all night. They had forever. The boy in the school uniform reached the counter first. Up close, I could see that his uniform wasn't from the 1980s. It was much older. The fabric was wool, hand-woven, the kind teachers wore in one-room schoolhouses when Kotzebue was still called Chikiktagruk. "Your turn," he said, extending one pale hand toward me. "Your turn to wait." Behind him, the other children formed a semicircle, cutting off any escape route except deeper into the restaurant. Their eyes reflected the Precht lights like animals, and that black liquid dripped steadily from their mouths onto the tile. The coffee pot chose that moment to finish brewing. The sound of dripping water filled the sudden silence, and for just a moment, the children hesitated. The smell of fresh coffee battled against the scent of wet earth and decay that followed them everywhere. But it wasn't enough anymore. Whatever protection the coffee had offered was fading, overwhelmed by their presence. The boy in the uniform smiled wider, showing all those pointed teeth. "Hungry," he said again. I had nowhere left to run. The front door wouldn't open for me. The back door led to more of them, and the basement was where they'd come from. The children stepped closer, their pale hands reaching out like they were warming themselves around a fire. My watch read 4:51 a.m. 3 hours and 9 minutes until sunrise. 3 hours and 9 minutes until Mayeli arrived for the day shift. But I was beginning to understand that sunrise wouldn't matter. Not anymore. The boy in the school uniform reached for me, his pale fingers stretching across the space between us like he was testing the distance. I stumbled backward, my hip catching the corner of the prep station, and knocked over a stack of paper cups that scattered across the floor with a sound like falling rain. That's when I noticed something that stopped my retreat cold. The children avoided the spilled coffee. Not just avoided it. They stepped around the dark puddles like the liquid was acid. Where drops had splashed near their feet, small wisps of steam rose from the tile, and the children pulled back with expressions that might have been pain if their faces could still show normal emotions. The coffee. It wasn't just the smell. It was the liquid itself. I lunged for the coffee pot, grabbing it by its black plastic handle as the boy made another grab for my arm. The pot was nearly full, the glass carafe hot enough to burn my palm through the thin material of my work gloves. I swung it in a wide arc, coffee sloshing over the rim and hitting the floor in dark splatters. The children recoiled as one, pressing themselves against the walls and display cases. The boy in the uniform hissed through his pointed teeth, a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. Where the coffee had landed, the wet footprints began to steam and fade, disappearing like they'd never existed. "Hurts, doesn't it?" I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Whatever you are, wherever you came from, you don't like this stuff." The girl in the traditional parka, the oldest of them, spoke for the first time. Her voice was the sound of wind across frozen tundra, empty and cold. "Coffee was not here when we died," she said. "Coffee was not here when the waters took us. It burns like the sun we never saw again." When the waters took us. The pieces clicked together in my mind like tumblers in a lock. Kotzebue sat on a spit of land surrounded by water. The sound, the rivers, the lagoons that froze and thawed with the seasons. How many children had the ice claimed over the decades? How many had broken through thin spots and disappeared into the dark water below? Their bodies never recovered. "You drowned," I said. "The ice broke," the boy confirmed. "Always, the ice breaks. We were playing, and the ice broke, and the water was so cold, so dark. We sank down where the light could not follow. Another child, a girl with braids that dripped black water, stepped closer to the edge of the coffee puddle. We have been waiting, under the ice, under the water, waiting for someone to join us. The cold is easier when there are more. I backed toward the walk-in cooler, keeping the coffee pot between me and the children. My mind raced through possibilities. The cooler was even colder than the restaurant. If they were drawn to cold and darkness, that would be the worst place to trap myself. But the office might work, or the bathroom, somewhere small where I could control access. Sarah laughed again, her voice now coming from multiple directions like she was standing all around me. You can't run forever, Jake. You can't stay awake forever. And when you sleep, when you finally let your guard down, shut up. I splashed more coffee toward the sound of her voice. You're not real. Sarah is in Anchorage. Sarah doesn't give a damn what happens to me. But she should, the voice said, and for a moment it sounded genuinely sad. She should care. After everything you did together, after all those years, she should at least care enough to call, to check on you, to make sure you're still alive. The words hit harder than they should have. Sarah hadn't called since I'd left Anchorage 3 months ago. Hadn't even responded to my text letting her know I'd found work. For all she knew, I could have driven into a snowbank and frozen to death somewhere between Fairbanks and here. The children sensed my distraction and pressed closer. Not close enough to risk the coffee, but near enough that I could smell the lake water and silk that clung to their skin. Near enough to see the ice crystals forming in their hair. She never loved you, the fake Sarah whispered. Not really. You were just convenient. A warm body in a cold bed. Stop it. She's happier now. Did you know that? She laughs more. Smiles more. She told her friends it was like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders when you finally left. My hands shook, coffee slopping over the rim of the pot and hitting the floor in irregular splashes. The children watched the liquid like cats watching a mouse, waiting for their chance. She said you were dead weight, a gambler and a drunk who couldn't hold down a job for more than 6 months. She said leaving you was the best decision she ever made. Stop it. I hurled the entire coffee pot across the restaurant. It hit the far wall with a crash of breaking glass, dark liquid spraying across the booths and floor in a wide arc. The children shrieked and scattered, pressing themselves into corners and behind the counter, anywhere the coffee couldn't reach them. But now I had no weapon, no protection. And the coffee pot lay in pieces near the front door, its contents spreading across the tile in a puddle that wouldn't last forever. The boy in the school uniform smiled, showing all those pointed teeth. Now you come with us, he said. Now you join us under the ice. They advanced slowly, savoring the moment. I backed toward the prep station, searching for anything else that might help. The bleach solution under the register. Would that work? The cleaning chemicals in the closet? My hand found the edge of the coffee grinder, a commercial unit the size of a small microwave. Inside, I could see a handful of whole beans left over from the last batch. An idea began forming. Desperate and probably stupid, but the only chance I had. I hit the grinder's power button and the machine roared to life, blades spinning at thousands of RPMs. The remaining beams cracked and shattered, filling the air with the rich scent of fresh ground coffee. It was stronger than the brewed stuff, more concentrated, and I saw the children hesitate as the smell hit them. But it wasn't enough. They kept coming, pale hands reaching for me across the prep station. I grabbed the industrial-sized bag of coffee beans from the shelf behind me, 20 pounds of dark roast that had arrived on yesterday's supply flight from Anchorage. The bag was heavy, awkward to lift, but I managed to hoist it over my head, "You want to know the real 8th rule?" I said, tearing open the bag with my teeth. "The real 8th rule is that sometimes you have to make your own protection." I dumped the entire bag into the running grinder. The machine screamed in protest, blades jamming and motor overheating as 20 pounds of coffee beans fed through mechanisms designed for maybe a cup's worth at a time. Sparks flew from the housing, and smoke began pouring from the motor vents. But the smell, God, the smell was overwhelming. Pure coffee essence filled the air like a cloud, so strong it made my eyes water. The children stumbled backward, pressing their hands to their faces, their mouths open in silent screams. The grinder motor exploded. Pieces of metal and plastic flew across the prep area, followed by a shower of perfectly ground coffee that settled over everything like brown snow. The children writhed on the floor where the grounds touched them, their pale skin bubbling and steaming as if the coffee was acid. In the sudden silence, I heard something I hadn't noticed before, the sound of an engine outside growing closer. Headlights swept across the front windows, cutting through the falling snow. A car door slammed. Footsteps crunched through the snow toward the restaurant. The children began to fade, their forms becoming translucent as the coffee grounds continued to settle around them. The boy in the school uniform looked at me with those clouded eyes, and for a moment, he looked like what he really was: a scared kid who'd made a mistake and paid for it with his life. "The ice breaks," he said again, his voice already distant. "Always the ice breaks, but sometimes people don't fall through." They were gone. All of them. The wet footprints, the black liquid, the bone-deep cold. Everything vanished like it had never been there. The restaurant looked normal again, except for the destroyed grinder and the coffee grounds covering every surface. The front door chimed. Nayeli walked in, shaking snow from her parka and stamping her boots on the welcome mat. She looked around at the mess, the broken glass, the spilled coffee, the grounds coating the prep area, and nodded like this was exactly what she'd expected to find. "First night's always the hardest," she said, pulling off her gloves. "You did good, Jake. Most people don't make it through the lockdown period on their first try." My watch read 5:47 a.m. Nayeli wasn't supposed to start until 7. "You're early," I said. She smiled, and for just a moment her eyes reflected the light like an animal's. "Had a feeling you might need backup. Good thing I brought the industrial-strength coffee." I stared at Nayeli as she hung her parka on the hook by the door, moving with the casual efficiency of someone starting a normal workday. But normal people didn't show up 2 hours early unless they knew something was wrong. And normal people's eyes didn't reflect light like reflective tape. "You knew they'd come tonight," I said. It wasn't a question. She glanced at the destroyed grinder, the coffee grounds coating every surface, the broken glass near the front door. "Coffee explosion. Classic first-timer mistake. You used the whole 20-pound bag, didn't you?" "How did you know I'd need backup?" Nayeli walked behind the counter and began pulling cleaning supplies from under the register. Industrial rags, a bucket, the same bleach solution I'd seen her use to clean up after strange customers. She moved like someone who'd done this exact routine many times before. "Because you're still here," she said. "Because you're still you, and not some pale thing with water dripping from your hair. That means you figured out the coffee trick, which means you survived something that most people don't." I followed her into the prep area, stepping carefully around the worst of the coffee grounds. Most people? How many others have worked this shift? Counting you? 7 in the past 3 years. She knelt beside the ruined grinder, examining the twisted metal and plastic fragments. "The ones who follow the protocols usually make it through the first week. The ones who don't..." She shrugged. "Well, They stop being problems pretty quickly. What happened to them? Same thing that almost happened to you. They join the others under the ice. Except, unlike the original victims, the ones who get turned keep their adult minds. Makes them more dangerous, more creative about getting people to break the rules. I thought about the fake Sarah voice, how perfectly it had mimicked my ex-wife's speech patterns, knew exactly which emotional wounds to probe. The woman last night, the one who ordered turkey and Swiss. She wasn't human, was she? Probably not. But she followed the rules, paid for her food, left when the transaction was complete. The ones who've been turned remember how to blend in during normal hours. It's only after midnight that they get creative. Nayeli stood and began sweeping coffee grounds into a dustpan, working with practiced movements that spoke of experience. The children are different. They're pure victims, innocent kids who drowned when the ice gave way. They're not malicious, just lonely, cold. They want company more than they want to hurt anyone. They tried to touch me. You said if they touch you, you become like them. Yes. But not because they want to hurt you, because they think they're saving you. In their minds, joining them means you'll never be cold or lonely again. They don't understand that what they're offering isn't life. I pulled out one of the dining room chairs and sat down heavily, exhaustion hitting me like a physical weight. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind the bone-deep weariness that comes after surviving something that should have killed you. Why didn't you warn me about the coffee trick? Because you had to figure it out yourself. If I'd told you, it wouldn't have worked. The coffee only protects people who discover its power on their own. Something about intent, or belief, or just plain desperation. I don't pretend to understand the mechanics. She dumped the dustpan full of grounds into the trash, then moved to clean up the broken glass. Each piece went into a separate bag, handled with the care of someone disposing of toxic waste. How long have you known about this place? Nayeli paused, a shard of coffee pot balanced on her fingertip. I was the third person to work nights here. Back when the restaurant first opened, nobody knew about the protocols. The first 2 employees just disappeared. Security cameras showed them clocking in, but they never clocked out, never went home, never left the building. But you survived. Barely. I figured out the coffee thing the same way you did, by accident, during a moment of pure panic. But I also learned something else that night. Something that's not written in the protocols. I leaned forward, suddenly alert. What? They can't leave this building. Whatever force binds the drowned children here, whatever keeps the turned ones coming back, it only extends to the restaurant itself. Once you step outside, you're safe. At least until you come back. That explained why the figure in the traditional park that hadn't forced the back door, why the woman who'd bypassed the front lock had left so easily. They could enter, but they couldn't pursue beyond these walls. So why stay? I asked. Why keep working here? Why not quit and let someone else deal with it? Nayeli finished collecting the glass and tied off the bag. When she looked at me, her expression was serious, in a way that made my stomach clench. Because if this place stays empty too long, they start spreading out. First to the hotel next door, then the value center, then the school. 3 years ago, we had a week where nobody would take the night shift. By day 6, kids at the Kotzebue Middle School were reporting strangers in the hallways after dark. Pale figures standing in empty classrooms, water dripping from their clothes onto the floor. They need this place. It's like a containment system. More like a drain. All the supernatural energy in this part of town gets pulled here. but it needs someone alive inside it to function properly. Someone to witness them, to acknowledge their existence. Without that ... They overflow. Exactly. So we keep the night shift staffed. We follow the protocols. We make sure the coffee pot never runs dry. And in exchange, the rest of Kotzebue sleeps peacefully, never knowing what's being held back just a few blocks away. I thought about the children I'd faced. Scared kids who'd made the mistake of trusting ice that looks solid. How many others were out there, trapped between life and death, held in this strange limbo by forces I couldn't begin to understand. The protocols, I said. Who wrote them? The fourth person to work nights here. A woman named Anyu Tuktuoyak. She lasted 6 months, longer than anyone before or since. Each night, she learned something new about them. What they wanted, how they behaved, what kept them at bay. She wrote it all down, trying to create a survival guide for whoever came next. What happened to her? Nayeli's expression darkened. She tried to help them. Started bringing things they'd lost when they drowned. Toys, photographs, pieces of jewelry recovered from the lake bottom over the years. She thought if she could give them what they were missing, they might find peace and move on. Did it work? For a while. The activity decreased. The children seemed calmer. But then she made a mistake. She touched one of them, trying to comfort a little boy who was crying. The moment her skin made contact with his, she joined them. Not immediately. It took 3 days. Each night she became a little paler, a little colder. By the 3rd night, she was one of them. But unlike the children, she remembered everything. Her adult mind, her knowledge of the protocols, her understanding of how the living world worked. She's still here, isn't she? She's one of the ones who comes back. The woman with the turkey and Swiss sandwich? That's Anyu. She orders the same thing every few weeks, pays with exact change, leaves without causing trouble. I think part of her is still trying to protect the night shift workers, even in her current state. The restaurant felt different now, charged with the weight of all the history Nayeli had shared. 3 years of night shift workers, most of them lasting days or weeks before the stress broke them. The few who survived long enough to learn the rules, only to discover they were part of something much larger and more complex than they'd imagined. So, what now? I asked. I keep working nights, keep following the protocols, keep the coffee brewing until I break down like the others. Nayeli smiled, and this time her eyes looked normal, tired and kind, without that reflective gleam. Now you make a choice. You can quit and walk away, find some other job in some other town, or you can stay and help me find a real solution. What kind of solution? The kind that gives those children the peace they deserve, the kind that breaks this cycle once and for all. But it's dangerous, and it's going to require someone who understands both sides, the living and the dead. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and the first hint of gray light touched the eastern horizon. Dawn was still hours away, but the promise of it was enough to make the shadows in the restaurant seem less threatening. I looked at the protocol sheet, still crumpled in my pocket, then at Maylee's expectant face. Tell me what you have in mind. I'm staying, I said, the words coming out before I'd fully made the decision. Whatever you have planned, count me in. Maylee nodded like she'd expected as much. Good. But first, you need to understand what we're really dealing with. This isn't just about helping some lost children find peace. This is about breaking a pattern that's been building for decades. She walked to the office and returned with a manila folder, thick with newspaper clippings, police reports, and handwritten notes. The papers looked old, some dating back to the 1970s, when the restaurant building was first constructed. Every winter, kids fall through the ice. she said, spreading the documents across a clean section of counter. It's been happening since before Kotzebue had a proper name, back when it was just fishing camps and seasonal villages. But something changed when they built this place. I picked up a police report dated 1978. 3 children, siblings aged 6, 8, and 10, had been playing on the ice near the boat harbor when a section gave way. Their bodies were never recovered. The report was signed by an officer named Samuel Kanguk. Kanguk, I said. Related to you? My grandfather. He investigated most of the drownings from the 70s and 80s, wrote detailed reports that nobody in authority wanted to hear because what he found didn't make sense according to modern thinking. She pulled out a handwritten journal, the pages yellowed and brittle. Samuel Kanguk's careful script filled every line, documenting water temperatures, ice thickness measurements, and witness statements that painted a disturbing picture. The ice where the children drowned was 8 inches thick, Nayeli read aloud, solid enough to support a snowmobile. But underneath, the water was moving in patterns that didn't match the currents. Circular motions, like something was stirring it from below. Something was calling them, I said, remembering the boy in the school uniform, the way he'd looked so purposeful despite his clouded eyes. Not calling, collecting. My grandfather interviewed elders who remembered similar stories from their childhoods. Children who went missing near certain spots on the water, always during the darkest months. But back then, the missing stayed missing. They didn't come back. She turned to a more recent section of the folder. Construction permits and building plans from 1976. The restaurant had been built on filled dirt, expanding the shoreline by about 30 feet into what had previously been shallow water. They built right on top of the traditional burial site, I said, recognizing the implications. Worse than that, they built on top of the spot where the current was strongest, where the water moved in those circular patterns my grandfather documented. Whatever force was drawing children into the ice, they put a building directly on top of it. The pieces formed a picture that made my skin crawl. The supernatural energy that had been claiming victims for generations, suddenly confined and concentrated by tons of concrete and steel. No wonder the children couldn't move on. They were trapped between the world of the living and whatever lay beneath the ice. So how do we fix it? Nayeli closed the folder and looked at me with an expression that was equal parts determination and fear. We give them what they've been trying to tell us they need. We help them complete the journey they started when they fell through the ice, which is to go home, not to their families. Most of those are long gone, but to the place where their people have always gone when the long night ends. She pulled out her phone and showed me a weather app. Current temperature, minus 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind speed, calm. Ice thickness on Kotzebue Sound, 16 inches and growing. Tonight's the new moon, she said. Darkest night of the month, when the boundary between worlds is thinnest. If we're going to do this, it has to be now. Do what exactly? Lead them home. Walk them to the traditional crossing place and help them find the path their ancestors used. But it means leaving the safety of the restaurant. It means going out onto the ice where they drowned. The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. We would wait until the deepest part of the night, then use coffee grounds to create a protective path from the restaurant to the traditional crossing spot about half a mile out on the Sound. The children would follow, drawn by our presence, but unable to touch us as long as we stayed within the coffee barrier. At the crossing place, Nayeli would perform a ceremony her grandmother had taught her. Words in Inupiaq, that would open the way to wherever spirits were supposed to go. If it worked, the children would finally be able to leave this world behind. If it didn't work, we'd be trapped on the ice with entities that had been growing stronger and more desperate for decades. "What about the others?" I asked. "The turned ones like Arnu?" "They're different. They chose to stay in a way. The children can't make that choice. They're too young, too confused. But the adults..." She shrugged. "We'll deal with them later, if there is a later." We spent the day preparing. Mayeli called in sick to her day job while I tried to sleep in the office, managing maybe 3 hours of fitful rest, filled with dreams of pale children and dark water. By afternoon, we had 20 pounds of coffee grounds divided into mason jars, a GPS unit marked with the crossing coordinates, and enough battery-powered lanterns to light our way across the ice. As sunset approached, the temperature dropped further. The sound would be frozen solid tonight, thick enough to support our weight, but still treacherous in the darkness. One wrong step, one crack in the ice, and we'd join the children in their eternal waiting. At 11 p.m., they began to appear. First the boy in the school uniform, materializing near the prep station might keep condensed out of the air itself. Then the girl with braids, and the one in the traditional parka, and others I hadn't seen before. A dozen children ranging in age from 5 to maybe 13, all bearing the telltale signs of death by drowning. They watched us with those clouded eyes as we prepared our supplies, understanding somehow that tonight was different. Tonight, something was going to change. "Are you ready?" Mayeli asked, shouldering a backpack full of coffee grounds. I picked up 2 of the battery lanterns and headed for the back door. Ready as I'll ever be. The night air hit like a physical blow, so cold it made my lungs ache with each breath. The snow had stopped completely, leaving the world wrapped in crystalline silence, broken only by the crunch of our boots and the distant sound of wind across the tundra. Behind us, the children followed at a respectful distance, their forms barely visible in the darkness. They moved silently across the snow, leaving no footprints, no disturbance in the white surface. Only the occasional glimpse of pale skin or the flutter of old-fashioned clothing marked their passage. The ice of Kotzebue's Sound stretched before us, like a vast frozen plain, marked here and there by pressure ridges where the expanding surface had buckled and cracked. Our GPS unit led us northeast, toward coordinates that had been passed down through generations of Inupiaq families. 20 minutes into our walk, I heard the ice singing. It was a low, harmonic vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound of tons of frozen water, adjusting to temperature changes and tidal stresses. But underneath that natural music was something else, something that made the children behind us move faster. "We're close," Mayeli said, checking the GPS again. "Another quarter mile." The crossing place, when we reached it, was unmarked except for a slight depression in the ice and a feeling of presence that raised the hair on my arms. This was where generations of Inupiaq people had believed the spirits of the dead could find their way to the next world, where the boundary between life and death grew thin enough to cross. Nayeli began to speak in her grandmother's language, words that flowed like water over stone, carrying meanings I couldn't understand, but could feel in my bones. The children gathered around us in a loose circle, their attention focused on something beyond the visible world. One by one, they began to fade, not disappearing, but becoming translucent, as if they were finally remembering how to let go. The boy in the school uniform was the last to go, looking at me with eyes that had cleared to their natural brown. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying the warmth of summer wind across frozen water. Then they were gone, and we were alone on the ice under a sky full of stars. The restaurant felt different when we returned from the ice. Not empty, That wasn't the right word. But lighter, like a weight had been lifted from the foundation itself. The coffee pot sat cold and silent on its burner, and for the first time since I'd started working here, that didn't fill me with dread. Nayeli hung her parka on the hook and immediately started cleaning, muscle memory taking over. But she moved differently now, without the constant tension that had marked her every gesture before. The children were gone, truly gone, and we both felt their absence like the end of a long-held breath. "So what happens now?" I asked, watching her wipe down counters that didn't need cleaning. "Now we find out if the restaurant can exist without them, if the supernatural drain still functions, or if we've broken something fundamental about this place." The answer came with the first customer of the morning, a construction worker from the Red Dog mine, ordering coffee and a breakfast sandwich before his shift. Normal transaction, normal conversation, normal everything. He paid with a credit card, thanked us for staying open early, and left through a door that chimed exactly as it should. No handprints on the glass, no strange residue, no sense that something otherworldly had just occurred. "I think we're good," Nayeli said, but her voice carried uncertainty. The uncertainty lasted exactly 12 hours. At 6 p.m., as I was setting up for another night shift, she appeared. Anyu took Twoyak, the woman who'd written the protocols, who'd tried to help the children and paid the price for her compassion. She stood in the doorway, like she'd materialized from the twilight itself, still wearing that blue parka, still carrying the weight of decades between life and death. "They're gone," she said, her voice carrying the same hollow quality I remembered from our previous encounter. I felt them leave. Felt the pull that's held me here for 3 years finally loosen. I approached carefully, remembering what Nayeli had said about the turned ones being different, more dangerous. But Anyu didn't feel threatening. She felt lost, like someone who'd suddenly discovered their purpose had vanished. "The children found peace," I said. "They crossed over to where they belonged." "Yes." She nodded slowly. "But that leaves the question of what happens to those of us who chose to stay. Who became something between life and death by our own actions." She walked to the counter, where I'd first read her handwritten protocols, her fingers tracing the edge of the metal surface. Where her skin touched, frost formed in delicate patterns that faded almost immediately. "I can feel it," she said. "The choice I couldn't make before. The path that was blocked by their need, their confusion. It's open now. You can leave, cross over like they did. I can. But I can also stay. Remain here as something else. A guardian, maybe. Someone who makes sure this never happens again." She looked at me with eyes that held depths I couldn't fathom. The children were victims, pulled into something they couldn't understand. But there are other forces in this part of Alaska. Older things, hungrier things that the presence of the drowned children was keeping at bay. "You're saying that children were accidentally protecting the town from something worse?" "I'm saying nature abhors a vacuum. The supernatural energy that concentrated here won't just disappear because we helped some lost souls find peace. It needs to be managed, directed, contained." She extended one pale hand toward me, and I saw my choice reflected in her frost-touched fingers. I could walk away, quit the night shift, return to whatever normal life I'd been trying to build in Kotzebue. Or I could stay and learn to become something more than human, something capable of standing guard against forces that most people couldn't even imagine. "Think about it," Anyu said, lowering her hand. "You have time, but not too much time. Something will fill the void the children left behind, and soon." She walked toward the door, then paused. The coffee trick still works, by the way. Some protections transcend the specific threats they were designed for. The door chimed as she left, and I was alone with the weight of another impossible decision. Outside, the aurora borealis painted the sky in sheets of green and gold, beautiful and utterly indifferent to the small human dramas playing out beneath its ancient light.